Hello, and welcome to my channel. In September of 2015, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, accused German automaker Volkswagen of cheating on emissions tests. They were fitting some of their cars with software that, when it detected it was undergoing an emissions test, would turn on the pollution controls. But once in regular driving conditions, they would turn the pollution controls off. Basically, they were lying about how dirty their cars were. The car's real emissions of nitrogen oxides were up to 40 times higher than allowed under US law. This is one of the biggest corporate scandals in history, but it doesn't really get talked about anymore. So what happened? Why did they do it? How much damage did they cause? And finally, are they paying the price for what they did? This is the story of Volkswagen Dieselgate. I've been thinking about this story for a while, and there's just so many angles to it. It's such a crazy story. There's politics, there's economics, there's corruption. I mean, where to even start? Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Diesel engines are more efficient than gasoline engines, so they're popular in Europe where fuel economy is a big concern. But diesel engines produce more nitrogen oxides, or NOx, than gasoline engines. These gases contribute to smog and respiratory problems, which is why there are strict laws governing their emissions. In 2008, the European Union passed new tailpipe emission standards for cars known as Euro 5. They would phase in over several years, and the deadline to meet them was 2016. Meanwhile, in the United States, tailpipe emissions were already regulated under the Clean Air Act. But starting in 2009, the EPA was required to set even stricter limits under a provision of the act known as the Greenhouse Gas Endangerment and Transport (GGET) Final Rule. The problem was that these new limits couldn't be met with existing technology. Car companies had to either invest in new technology or cheat. According to a report by the Council for Economic Research, investing in new technology would have cost each manufacturer between 12 and 25 billion euros. On top of that, there was another problem. US regulators were considering lowering emissions standards for heavy trucks, which made sense because trucks are less efficient due to their weight and size. But that would make it harder to meet passenger car standards. So Volkswagen wasn't the only company cheating. Just about every major automaker was doing it too. What they all did was install a type of software called a defeat device. It sounds like something out of a spy movie, but it's exactly what it sounds like. Defeat devices would recognize when a car was being tested for emissions and then turn on the pollution controls. Once the car was back on the road, they would turn the pollution controls off. But Volkswagen was different. They cheated on a larger scale than anyone else. According to court records, Volkswagen employees knew that its defeat devices might not work in hot climates. They also knew that the devices wouldn't work on some models of Audi and Porsche cars, which are owned by Volkswagen. But they went ahead with it anyway. In fact, one employee emailed his boss writing, "We are all aware that we are looking at a mega scandal." Well, he was right. In 2015, the EPA announced that it was opening an investigation into Volkswagen after a researcher from West Virginia University alerted them to the issue. That year, Volkswagen admitted that 11 million of its cars worldwide had defeat devices installed. They were mostly diesel vehicles sold in the US, Europe, China, and Canada. After this news broke, Volkswagen stock plummeted. They expected losses of around $7 billion in the United States alone, along with billions more in fines and penalties. At least 18 current and former Volkswagen employees were criminally charged. Several pleaded guilty, including the former head of Volkswagen Group of America. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Volkswagen was ordered to pay $4.3 billion in criminal fines. And in 2020, they agreed to pay $150 million to settle claims that they intentionally misled consumers. And yet somehow they still managed to emerge stronger than ever. Their global market share actually increased after the scandal. What the hell? How did they get away with all of that? There's a couple factors here. First, the United States government was happy to settle with Volkswagen because they wanted to get the money and move on. That's kind of cynical, but it's true. The Obama administration was more focused on climate change than pollution, and they had been working closely with Volkswagen to lower emissions through a process known as the midterm evaluation. Not to mention the fact that Volkswagen was already paying billions of dollars to settle claims from car owners. Regulators felt that prosecuting more Volkswagen employees would just be milking the cow at that point. Second, people still wanted to buy Volkswagen cars. Here's a chart showing the percentage of people who said that they were willing to buy a Volkswagen after the scandal broke. Even today, 63% of people say they would consider buying one. But most importantly, other automakers were doing it too. Consider the fact that the EPA didn't have time to properly investigate every company. They just went after Volkswagen because it was the first one they caught. Plus, they likely didn't want to put too much pressure on the industry because they needed the automakers to cooperate on the transition to electric vehicles. Unfortunately, all of this has led to a lot of mistrust between automakers and regulators. Regulators feel that they can't trust automakers to regulate themselves. And automakers resent the fact that they're being told what to do by unelected bureaucrats. So that doesn't bode well for the future of the industry. Plus, it's hard to say that Volkswagen got off easy. They've been hit with billions of dollars in fines and lawsuits. But in the big picture, that's nothing compared to what they gained from cheating. Let me explain. While the EU was busy cracking down on Volkswagen, car emissions continued to grow across Europe. Even before the pandemic, air pollution from cars was responsible for thousands of deaths every year in the UK alone. In 2019, 4,500 people in the UK died because of long-term exposure to pollution from diesel engines. These people would have lived longer if they hadn't been exposed to all of that pollution. Meanwhile, in the United States, people were getting lung cancer because of the air quality in Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Volkswagen was able to sell more cars because people didn't know that those cars were polluting the air. In other words, Volkswagen cheated their way to the top. That brings us to our final question. Are they paying the price for what they did? Probably not. I mean, hundreds of people have died because of the pollution produced by Volkswagen cars. And yes, they paid billions of dollars to settle lawsuits and criminal charges, but that doesn't bring people back. Plus, many of the people who died probably never even heard of Volkswagen. Most people don't know the difference between gasoline and diesel cars. We just know that both of them pollute. That means that Volkswagen has benefited from the fact that they polluted the air. In other words, they profited from crime. Is that fair? It seems like a betrayal of the public trust. When a company profits from a crime, it should be punished more severely. Take, for example, Big Tobacco. They've been fined tens of billions of dollars for deliberately misleading customers about the dangers of smoking. And yet they continue to spend millions of dollars lobbying governments around the world to lift smoking bans. Or take BP, the oil company that caused the largest environmental disaster in history. After spilling 210 million gallons of oil in the Gulf of Mexico, they were forced to pay a record fine of $20 billion. But since then, they've been trying to get that money back. They've argued that the fine is hurting their ability to operate as a viable oil company, and they've asked the judge to reduce it by half. Now, it's worth mentioning that the Gulf Coast Claims Court is notoriously pro-BP. Many people believe that the judge is taking BP's side because he received large political donations from BP executives. That's definitely something to think about. Ultimately, though, the best solution to this problem is for governments to stop regulating the car industry. Sure, it would suck to see the number of deaths increase from pollution, but that would be nothing compared to the amount of damage that's been done by giving automakers control over emission standards. Now, you might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, aren't electric cars better? And to that I say, well, no, not really. You see, unlike gasoline and diesel cars, which are subject to government regulations, electric cars are unregulated. This gives automakers complete control over how they're manufactured. For example, Tesla can decide whether or not to include parts that make their cars vulnerable to hackers. And to make things worse, electric car batteries are incredibly dangerous, and most people don't even know it. In 2019, the federal government took over 20,000 calls reporting lithium-ion battery fires. Now imagine if someone decided to rig an electric car's battery to explode at a certain time. That's the kind of danger we're talking about. Anyway, hopefully this video helped you understand what Volkswagen did and why it matters. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more content. As always, thanks for watching.